This episode sponsored by Saley. Hello and welcome, history buffs. My name is Nick Hodges, and you might want to powder up your hair and grab a slice of cake, because today we're going to take a look at Marie Antoinette. Based on the book Marie Antoinette: The Journey by Lady Antonia Fraser, the 2006 film Marie Antoinette tells the true story of the reign of the last Queen of France. Born into the famous Habsburg family of Austria, Maria Antonia Josepha Joanna was destined to be married off to Europe's greatest royal family, the Bourbons of France. She was to be wed to Louis Auguste, the future King Louis XVI, and unite their houses. But Marie Antoinette would have a complicated relationship with her new French subjects. At first, they were unsure of this little Austrian girl. Was she a spy? Could she be loyal to France? Despite these concerns, the people fell in love with a naive young Dauphine. But as conditions worsened in France, they grew to hate her. As an outsider, Marie Antoinette became a symbol for all of France's problems, like social inequality and an economy in shambles. And as these tensions climbed, so did the people's hatred of their queen. But how much was Marie Antoinette really to blame? Did her lifestyle bankrupt France? Did she truly contribute to the decline of the French monarchy? Or was she just a scapegoat? Well, join me as we take a look at Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette, and I'll reveal which parts are made up and which parts are true. And considering the movie was based on the book, a lot of the real history had to be condensed for the big screen. So I'll try to fill in the gaps and give you a sense of her life and reveal how she turned from a beloved young Dauphine to a hated queen in just 19 years living at Versailles. This is Marie Antoinette. When the movie begins, we see a young Marie Antoinette approach the French border, where she is met by the Comtesse de Noailles. As the head of her household, Marie would come to call her Madame Etiquette in the years to come, because it was her job to teach the young Dauphine how to behave and act in her future home of Versailles. We then see Marie embrace the Comtesse de Noailles, and, as accurately depicted, the Comtesse was shocked by this move, as this conduct broke the very rigid etiquette expected of Versailles royals. We also meet the Comte de Mercy Argenteau, an Austrian diplomat who travelled with Marie Antoinette to France to serve as her advisor. Although he was there to help guide the young Dauphine, he was, above all else, on a mission to secure and protect the Franco-Austrian alliance. And in the movie, Mercy informs Marie Antoinette that they've arrived at Chauterne, where the Dauphine will formally cross into France. However, this is inaccurate. Though the caravan did stay at Chauterne Abbey the night before the handover ceremony, the event itself took place on an island on the Rhine River near Kiel, just across the border from Strasbourg. Now, as to why they changed this detail, my guess is that it was just simply cheaper to film in the woods. But in any case, the idea of a ceremony at the border is true. The Comtesse de Noailles explains it to the young Dauphine.
This structure for the handover ceremony has been built precisely astride the borders of the two great lands. You have entered on Austrian soil, you will exit on French as the Dauphine of France. Now you must bid farewell to your party and leave all of Austria behind.
And the Comtesse means this, literally, because at the time, France and Austria, the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, shared a border. Whereas today, France and Austria are separated by Germany and Switzerland, but at the time, Strasbourg sat right between the two, making the perfect choice for the ceremony. And it was here between the Holy Roman Empire and France that Marie Antoinette had to leave everything behind. And they weren't kidding, they even make her leave her dog Mops.
Mops!
You can have as many French dogs as you like.
Fortunately for all you dog lovers out there, I'm happy to say that she did end up getting Mops back in real life. Mercy was the one who helped negotiate for his later arrival. Anyway, we then see Marie Antoinette symbolically and, well, actually stripped of her Austrian clothing, and she dons new French ones. The Comtesse de Noailles tells her that it is customary that nothing belonging to a foreign court can be brought into France and Versailles, and, as accurately depicted, Marie Antoinette doesn't seem bothered by this at all. Growing up as an archduchess, she would have been used to being dressed and pampered like this. Girls in Marie Antoinette's position had very little privacy. As Antonia Fraser put it in her book, and I quote, "She had, after all, been treated as a doll, to be dressed up in this and that at the Adult Swim since childhood. This was just one more example of that process."
This is ridiculous.
This, madame, is Versailles.
After leaving the tent, she travels to meet her husband, Louis Auguste. She also meets the King of France, Louis XV, and a bunch of other family members like the King's daughters and her new aunts. This is all pretty much on point, even down to some of the more memorable lines, like when she greets the man who helped make the marriage happen, the Duc de Choiseul.
I shall never forget that you were responsible for my happiness.
And that of France.
This was a well-documented exchange, so it's nice to see the movie get it right. This film does a pretty good job with famous quotes, and takes care to include a lot of small details like this. As the Dauphine approaches her new grandfather and king, we hear the king's daughters, her new aunts, already gossiping about her.
Here comes the Austrian.
I hope you like apple strudel.
And this nasty little move was unfortunately commonplace at Versailles. Despite the fact that the royal aunts never really liked the new Dauphine, Marie Antoinette would end up spending a lot of time in their chambers, which was customary given her position. And just like how the Comte de Mercy influenced Marie Antoinette to make decisions that would benefit Austria, so too would the royal aunts guide her for their own sakes. When Marie Antoinette arrives at Compiègne, she first meets with a very charming King Louis XV. But when she meets her husband, Louis Auguste, he is much less so. In fact, this first glimpse of him highlights some of the hallmark personality traits of Louis Auguste, the future King Louis XVI of France. Quiet, shy, and frankly, a bit dull. By the way, a small nitpick here, but the real Louis Auguste was a much larger fellow. I mean, the actor Jason Schwartzman does a fine job of portraying the Dauphin's standoffishness, but he doesn't quite capture his physical size. Louis Auguste was described as being quite fat, and only grew fatter over time, apparently a Bourbon family trait. Louis Auguste also kept a hunting journal where he'd write down important events in his life. By the time he met his wife in person, he had already kept this journal for 4 years. But what did he write on the day he met his wife, the lovely and fair Marie Antoinette, for the first time? Meeting with Madame la Dauphine. How romantic. From this chilly reception, Marie Antoinette heads to her new home, blissfully unaware of the complexities of Versailles court life ahead of her. Speaking of navigating unfamiliar situations, I want to introduce today's sponsor, Saily. If you've ever travelled and struggled with staying connected abroad, dealing with roaming fees, searching for Wi-Fi, or standing in line at the airport for a local SIM card, Saily is going to make your life a whole lot easier. For example, during my recent trip to Norway, I found myself constantly switching between networks just to stay connected. But with Saily's eSIM, I could have downloaded the app before I left, installed the eSIM once, and enjoyed seamless, affordable mobile data throughout the trip. No hassle, no interruptions. Saily offers coverage in over 160 countries, with regional and global plans, so you can travel freely and stay online wherever you go. And with unlimited data options, you don't have to worry about running out of connection when you need it most. Plus, it's super easy to set up. Just download the app, buy a plan, and you're ready to go. So if you want to avoid all the stress and stay connected on your next adventure, scan the QR code on screen now to download the Saily app and use my code HISTORYBUFFS at the checkout for an exclusive 15% discount. Stay connected with Saily wherever your journey takes you. The relationship between Marie Antoinette and her husband started off cold and remained that way for years. Famously, on the night of their marriage ceremony, they never consummated, and rumours quickly spread throughout Versailles the next day.
Apparently, nothing happened, Your Majesty.
Nothing. Nothing.
Nothing.
Oh dear.
Now, though Louis Auguste was initially not interested in his marriage, he did have 3 other passions: history, hunting, and locksmithing. We see the latter 2 in the movie. He often goes on hunts with other members of the court, and he briefly discusses locksmithing with Marie Antoinette.
So, I've heard you make keys as a hobby?
Yes.
And you enjoy making keys?
Obviously.
There was very little privacy in the day-to-day lives of the newlywed royals. In fact, it took 7 years before they finally consummated their marriage. The big question, of course, is why. Was it because he wasn't interested in her? Well, throughout the movie we see Louis turn from her in bed, sometimes apologizing, sometimes coming up with excuses. It gets to a point where King Louis XV, 3 years after their wedding, calls in a doctor to check if the Dauphin is even capable of producing a child, but the doctor reported that there was no physical reasons why the couple couldn't do the deed. So why was there so much interest in the relationship between this young couple? Well, for one, if the couple had a boy, he'd one day become the Dauphin of France. For a long time after Marie Antoinette and Louis Auguste got married, there was no next generation of Bourbon boys to become future heirs to the throne. But the pressure didn't just come from the French side. The Empress, Maria Theresa, was also keen to see an Austrian grandchild born into the French monarchy. In the movie we see several moments where the Empress writes to her daughter, and these words are taken from the actual letters between the mother and daughter. And some of these letters were, what's the nicest way of saying this? Direct.
Dearest Antoinette, it is clear that the heart of your problems in your new home is your inability to inspire sexual passion in your husband. There is no reason a girl with so many charms as you should be in this situation. Remember, you represent the future, and nothing is certain about your place there until the final physical act to crown the Franco-Austrian alliance is performed.
Meanwhile, as Marie Antoinette tries and fails to get the attention of her shy husband, she gets used to life at Versailles. We see this happen gradually throughout the movie as she adopts French fashions and pleasures. But if we're going to talk about fashion, we've got to talk about the hair and the rouge. Now, although Marie Antoinette is today synonymous with those big coiffed hairstyles from this period, the practice was already commonplace at Versailles before she arrived. In fact, by 1770, when she first came to France, one wouldn't come to court without heavily powdered hair or at least a wig. These wigs, called perukes, became popular in France with King Louis XIV. Though they existed before as a way of covering up baldness, especially baldness caused by syphilis outbreaks that plagued early modern Europe, they became stylish when the Sun King himself started wearing them. Not only were they fashionable, but practical, especially since head lice are much more easily removed from a wig than your own hair. So not only do we see everyone wearing these powdered wigs at court, but they get bigger over time. I mean, look at the size of this hairdo. Heavy rouge was also very fashionable in France, and it wasn't just a little bit of dabbed onto the cheeks, but big circles of red painted right on. The idea was the more rouge on your cheek, the more your eyes stand out. By 1780, around 2 million pots of rouge were used each year by French women. When Marie first arrived, she was kind towards everyone. After all, she was new to Versailles and didn't know the social hierarchy. But over time, the people around her started to influence her and how she should behave. The best example of this is when she first meets King Louis XV's mistress, the Madame du Barry. It was common knowledge that du Barry was the king's mistress because he brought her everywhere. Du Barry was actually the king's third mistress brought into Versailles in 1769. The king's wife, by the way, had died by this point, but it wouldn't have mattered anyway. Affairs and liaisons at court were pretty common and generally accepted.
That was unnecessary.
Just like we see in the movie, the real Marie Antoinette did not get on with du Barry. But the question is, if the Dauphin was adjusting to life at Versailles, why should she be so against this one aspect of it? Or does she have a personal grudge with du Barry? Now, there are several reasons for Marie Antoinette's feelings towards the Madame du Barry, but the bulk of it lies with her royal aunts. As the king's daughters, they despised this woman who moved in and encouraged their father's favour, and, as accurately depicted, they held tremendous influence over Marie Antoinette. In the hopes of having strong bonds with the women around her, as she once had with her older sister Charlotte, Marie was eager to do as her new aunts asked, snubbing du Barry whenever she had the chance.
De Berry's dreadful.
Dreadful.
The way she dresses. She thinks she is the queen.
Yes, she does. And those ridiculous pet monkeys.
Where does she come from?
From every bed in Paris.
And I don't want to say this, but I don't think that she has greeted you with respect. That's just my opinion.
A little later in the movie, we see Du Barry come up to speak with Marie Antoinette. Now, court etiquette and social hierarchy dictated that Du Barry cannot speak with the Dauphine first. Marie would have to initiate conversation. Though it's clear that Marie Antoinette knew she had to speak with Du Barry first, she instead looks at her aunt's shoes and starts a side conversation with him about fashion. Du Barry takes the hint and leaves the room. The aunts are pleased that Marie Antoinette snubbed their father's mistress, and the Dauphine is just happy that someone is happy with her. However, Mercy, her advisor, strongly discourages Marie behaving this way.
Snubbing the king's favourite is publicly criticising the king's behaviour. All you need do is say a few words to her. Because of rank, she is not allowed to speak to you first.
Well, I certainly have nothing to say to her. And why should I approve of his cavorting with a harlot?
Your Royal Highness.
Well, that's what she is. Everyone knows that she's from a brothel and that title was bought for her.
Your mother and I are very concerned. Du Barry has been complaining to the king that you will not address her, and you cannot afford to fall out of favour with the king. Especially as your marriage, not exactly on solid ground.
Now you might think something as trivial as this must surely be the stuff of Hollywood fiction. But no, this little tiff between them and how it played out is absolutely true. At the behest of Mercy, her advisor, Marie begrudgingly makes a small gesture towards Du Barry. She says one quick line to her about the amount of people in Versailles, then walks away. Apparently, that was enough to publicly recognize Du Barry, gain the king's favour, and play court politics. But to go back to that last line from Mercy about her marriage being on shaky ground, that is really the crux of all of this. Marie Antoinette is in a new place with a shy husband who won't give her children. She's facing pressure from her mother, the Empress, to control affairs in court in favour of Austria, and the only close friends she has are the Princess de Lamballe and the Duchess of Polignac. And it didn't help that Louis's younger brother had a child first, beginning the next generation of French kings. Which only makes it more scandalous that Marie and Louis still haven't consummated their marriage. However, there's a big inaccuracy here. The film shows the Comte and Comtesse de Provence having a child. The Comte de Provence, by the way, is Louis Auguste's younger brother, Louis Stanislas. Yeah, I know it's confusing trying to remember which Louis is which, just bear with me. Anyway, in reality, it wasn't the Comte and Comtesse de Provence who had this child, but Louis's youngest brother, Charles Philippe, and his wife, the Comte and Comtesse d'Artois. As to why they made this change, I haven't got a clue, because both of Louis's brothers are in the movie. In any case, Marie Antoinette's nephew's arrival only increases the pressure to produce an heir of her own. And, as accurately depicted in the movie, to escape all this tension, Marie Antoinette turned to excessive shopping and gambling to help battle the loneliness and isolation. For Marie Antoinette, deeply unhappy in her loveless marriage to a seemingly disinterested husband, these were ways of escaping reality. As the Dauphine, she could have anything she wanted, so she started to spend. I need to point out, though, that the Duchess de Polignac didn't come to Versailles and become close friends with Marie Antoinette until after she was queen. So while they did all party together, it wasn't until much later on. Another outlet was the opera. Not only did Marie Antoinette support and visit the opera throughout her time in France, both in Paris and at Versailles, but just like we see in the movie, she even sang in the opera once she became queen. She also blew off steam by, of course, partying. There's a scene where the Duchess de Polignac suggests they go to a masked ball. The group sneaks away to have some fun, and it's here that Marie Antoinette meets the man who later became her alleged lover, Count Axel von Fersen of Sweden. But the real affair, if it even happened, didn't begin until much later on. There's still debate on whether or not they had a physical affair, but what is undeniable is that the two became very close. Now, in the movie, when the group returns home from the ball, they learn that King Louis XV is sick. In reality, this didn't happen on the same night. The masked ball was on January 30th, 1774, whereas the king didn't fall ill until April 1774. And while I'm on the subject, the film doesn't portray the passage of time very well. I understand that it's hard to fit 19 years of Marie Antoinette's life at Versailles into a 2-hour movie, but there's no way to judge how quickly time passes. Sure, you could see grey hairs appear on the men after a while, but without knowing the actual history beforehand, the audience would have no context for when these events happened in real life. By May 3rd, 1774, it was clear that the king had smallpox, but what we don't see in the movie is that during this time, Louis Auguste had to be quarantined. You see, Marie Antoinette was given a smallpox variolation when she was a small child, so she contracted and recovered from a very mild form of the disease. But Louis Auguste was never exposed to smallpox, so he was at risk of getting sick. Both he and Marie Antoinette quarantined for 6 months away from Versailles. Knowing that he was dying, the king had to put his affairs in order before he passed. The biggest issue was Du Barry, his mistress. To preserve his spiritual afterlife, he needed to fully repent for all his sins. And for the French, this also meant banishing mistresses. We see this happen in the movie too. Du Barry's sent away, and Marie Antoinette never needs to properly reconcile with her. King Louis XV died a week later on May 10th, 1774. 19-year-old Louis Auguste and 18-year-old Marie Antoinette were now the king and queen of France.
Dear God, guide us and protect us. We are too young to reign.
In the beginning, things didn't change too much for Marie Antoinette. Sure, she was queen now, but her life was still filled with parties and luxury. Her 18th birthday, for example, was a major event with gambling, excessive drinking, a huge cake, foreign entertainment, and wait, did the Duchess de Polignac just snort cocaine? To be fair, I suppose that could have been snuff, which is finely ground tobacco leaves. Just one snort of that gives you a quick hit of nicotine. But I don't think they would have been brazenly bumping lines like this out in the open. Well, not at this party anyway. Thing is, unlike in the movie's timeline, King Louis XV was still alive at this point and had long since banned snuff from Versailles, and Marie Antoinette turned 18 6 months before King Louis XV's death, so it would have been prudent for her guests to snub the snuff rules just yet. But back to what I was saying. The parties, the masked ball, the gambling, much of it were Marie Antoinette's efforts to mask her isolation and loneliness, albeit expensive efforts. At one point in the movie, Mercy scolds Marie Antoinette for her spending habits.
Your Majesty, you have spent over 50,000 already this month. There is nothing left to give to your charities.
Oh,
Your Majesty, Leonard is here to fit your new wigs.
all right.
Mercy isn't wrong. She was spending too much money. The film accurately shows us the true extravagance of Marie Antoinette's lifestyle, even the wasted food left behind. It wasn't just the parties or the gambling or the shopping that cost a fortune. The Queen's household was huge. She had about 500 people in her personal staff. It cost 4 million livres to run. That's an obscene amount of money. That's equivalent to several $100 million today. All of it was paid for by the minister of the royal household. And guess where that money came from? The common people. The nobility and the clergy in pre-revolutionary France were largely exempt from paying taxes. So this lavish lifestyle that everyone at Versailles led, all of it bought and paid for by France's taxes on the commoners. And don't even get me started on the coronation. The new king and queen spent exorbitant amounts on it, despite the Controller General of Finance at the time advising them against it. France's economy was in shambles after the 7 Years' War. There was a 22 million livre deficit, with a projected 78 million more to come. And it didn't help that there was a bad grain harvest in 1774, which led to bread shortages. It was in very poor taste to spend so much money on the coronation when their people were starving. Things got so bad that the Flour War broke out the same year, a general protest over the lack of food and the terrible economy. By the way, you know how loads of people attribute that famous line, "Let them eat cake," to Marie Antoinette?
And when they went to the Queen to tell her her subjects had no bread, do you know what she said?
Let them eat cake.
That's such nonsense. I would never say that.
She's right, there's no evidence she ever said that. In fact, this was a line attributed to lots of royal women throughout history. One example is Marie Theresa of Spain, the wife of King Louis XIV. Allegedly, Marie Theresa said, "Let the people eat la croûte de pâté," or the crust of the pâté, in response to the French people starving during her time. But if Marie Antoinette did say her famous line, Antonia Fraser, the author of the book this movie's based on, believes it would have been here during the Flour War. regardless of whether she said it or not, the reason it still resonates with people today is because it's the perfect metaphor of the indifference and ignorance by the elite towards the poor and hungry. But in any case, the spending at Versailles really was that bad, and it made the economy even worse. The 4 million livres was just Marie Antoinette's household. The king's was even bigger. And then you also need to factor in all the other royals living there too. Louis's aunts, his younger brothers, their wives, and his new nephew. There were a lot of people living at Versailles. It was an expensive place to run. Now, because the film really just focuses on Marie Antoinette, there is so much political and social context missing from the movie. For example, the only time we see any French commoners is at the very end, and even then, it's just their silhouettes from behind. But to get a clearer picture of Marie Antoinette, to understand why they were chased out of Versailles and eventually decapitated during the French Revolution, we need this context. We need to see how the French people felt about her. I mean, we certainly know how the people at court felt. In the movie, you can hear people in the hallways of Versailles bitching about her, saying stuff like,
It's Baron, what do you expect?
When will you give us an heir?
I hear she's frigid.
and comments like these were said in real life. So it's no surprise that Marie Antoinette buried herself in the company of her close friends, in her parties, and in going to the opera. But she also went out to engage with her people, at least initially before they turned on her. For example, Marie Antoinette had a soft spot for kids. In real life, she once pseudo-adopted an orphaned boy from a nearby village and gave him a Versailles education. That's why the let them eat cake line doesn't really work for Marie Antoinette. She loved her people and would be more likely to give them her own cake or brioche if she knew they were starving. But it's not just the commoners missing from the movie. Politics and some conflicts are barely mentioned, and some really important events are just completely left out, like the diamonds necklace affair of 1784, which worsened Marie Antoinette's public image. In one scene, we see King Louis XVI at a council meeting to discuss what to do about the American Revolution. Louis was notoriously indecisive as king. His finance minister, who at this time was Jacques Necker, encouraged him to support the Americans.
The Americans are asking for help in their revolution.
Well, I can't exactly see assisting those who are rejecting their sovereign.
But it would make a strong statement to England.
Can our finances take the strain?
Oh, taxes will be raised slightly. I recommend we help our American brothers and show the rest of Europe our strength.
All right, then. Send funds to America.
The general gist of the scene here is accurate. The French did lend money and troops to support the American Revolution. Although it would be expensive, the French wanted to take this opportunity to hurt their main enemy at the time, the British. But the whole situation was much more complex than the movie makes it seem. First, there were a lot of different finance ministers that came and went based on court politics and public opinion. Right before Jacques Necker was a man named Anne Robert Jacques Turgot. He was the one who recommended the new king and queen not spend so much on their coronation. He also believed that the French should not help the Americans as the economy was already in shambles after the 7 Years' War. See where I'm going with this? Turgot was then dismissed in May 1776 and Jacques Necker was brought on board. And he took out foreign loans to help support the American Revolution, only worsening France's economic situation in the long run. Meanwhile, during all this stuff we don't see, the king and queen are spending even more money tricking out the gardens of Versailles, particularly with the Petit Trianon. Marie Antoinette longed for a place where she could rebuild the gardens of her childhood manors, so her husband gifted her the Petit Trianon, a palace originally commissioned by Louis XV. It was here that Marie Antoinette spent a good chunk of her time, away from the main palace of Versailles, and away from the reminders that her husband had still not consummated their marriage. And on that topic, the people were growing restless. It was odd that 7 years into the marriage, the king and queen had still not produced an heir. But, as accurately depicted in the movie, that all changed after Emperor Joseph II, Marie Antoinette's older brother, visited the king and coached him how to perform step by step.
So, I thought we could have a little talk about the marriage bed.
The doctor said I was fit.
Good. What goes on exactly? I understand you have a certain passion for locks.
Yes.
Well, sometimes when a key doesn't quite fit.
Trust me, guys, as awkward as this sounds, I promise you, the truth is more cringy than fiction. In a letter to his brother Leopold, Emperor Joseph described when Louis confided in him of when he tried to have sex with Marie, and I quote, "The French king had well-conditioned strong erections and introduced his member, stayed there for 2 minutes without moving, withdrew without ejaculation, and then still erect, wished his wife good evening. He should be whipped like a donkey to make him discharge in anger." In any case, on August 30th, 1777, the most awkward couple in history had finally done the deed. In April of 1778, Marie Antoinette was pregnant. Later that year, on December 19, 1778, the King and Queen had their first child, a girl named Maria Theresa Charlotte, a nod to her powerful mother and her sister and childhood best friend. Marie Antoinette had finally become a mother. Now, a lot of details in this scene are pretty accurate. For example, there were that many people there to witness the birth. It's also true that Marie Antoinette fell unconscious from the lack of air and they had to open the window to wake her back up. And when they discovered the first child is a girl, Marie Antoinette says this in the movie.
"Poor little girl. You were not what was desired, but you are no less dear to me. A boy would be the son of France, but you, Marie-Thérèse, shall be mine."
It's not word for word what she said in real life, which was again very well documented, but it's close enough and captures the sentiment. The young child was given the nickname Madame Royale. Becoming a mother marked a significant change in her life, which we could see visually and accurately portrayed in the movie. Gone are the party scenes, the excess, the drinking and the gambling. Instead, we see Marie Antoinette change her style completely. She dresses in simple white linens, spends time with her daughter outside the gardens of the Petit Trianon, and tries to return to a simpler life in nature. Now, just a few things here. Once again, the passage of time is confusing. We jump from the newborn Madame Royale to a little girl of around 2 or 3 years old in about 3 minutes of screen time. And again, I know they're trying to present 19 years of Marie Antoinette's life in just under 2 hours, and some things need to be sped up. But if the film perhaps explained what year it was with some on-screen titles, then that could have provided some much-needed context. It's also in this phase of her life that we see Marie Antoinette reacquaint herself with the Swedish Count von Fersen, who's just come home from fighting with the Americans. But again, the timing of this is wrong. To show you what I mean, when King Louis XVI visits his wife at the Petit Trianon, he says this.
"Come home. We're having a ball for the soldiers who fought in America."
So this would have been when the French troops returned from fighting around 1783, and it was in 1783, at least in real life, when Fersen and the Queen spent the summer together, probably having an affair, but at the very minimum, enjoying each other's company. The problem is that the movie shows this happening way too early, because at the time Fersen was away fighting in the American War of Independence, 2 big events happened. First, the Empress Marie Theresa of Austria died in 1780, and second, the Queen had her second child in October of 1781, a boy, Louis Joseph, the new Dauphin of France. The film puts these events after Fersen returns from America, and leaves again, which is inaccurate. When Fersen leaves Marie Antoinette after their summer together, he goes off to serve Gustavus III of Sweden for a year before returning to Versailles. He then stays with the royal family until finally fleeing the French Revolution in 1791. Basically, the movie just conflates all these events together to build this narrative of Marie falling in love and having a liaison, despite being against them when she first arrived, as evidenced by how she treated Madame de Barry.
He amuses her and she likes to be amused. There's nothing unregal in that, Monsieur.
Now, while all of this is going on, we do get little hints of the worsening political situation in Paris, where the people are starving. We see Louis meet with his finance minister and various other councillors who basically tell him this.
Problem of the debt is grave, Your Majesty. People of France are hungry.
Sending troops to America is costing more than what we estimated.
But we can't let England win. We must show our strength.
We will continue aid to the Americans.
Now, the timing of this conversation doesn't make sense, but it was a genuine concern. Supporting the Americans was putting France into further debt. It's scenes like these that serve to remind us about what was really going on behind the scenes. Because in the movie, we never get to actually see the state of France's decline. The starvation, the desperation, the riots, all of that happens off-screen. Marie Antoinette is told that the people are starving, but she doesn't know how to help. This is true in real life as well. She was never great with politics, and Mercy was often frustrated by her inability to play the game.
The French can be fickle, and Her Majesty would do well to be more attentive. Life is getting harder for the people of France. The bread shortage is grave.
Well, there must be something the king can do to ease their sufferings.
But by this point, there wasn't much to be done. Things are alleviated, slightly, with the birth of the new Dauphin of France, Louis XVI. After seeing his son for the first time, Louis told Marie this.
Madame, you have fulfilled our wishes and those of France. You are the mother of a Dauphin.
Meanwhile, outside of Versailles, the French people are momentarily ecstatic. Marie Antoinette feels fulfilled, knowing she's given birth to the new Dauphin and has done what her mother sent her out to do. Her son, the heir to the throne, is part French and part Austrian. And then the movie does another time jump. In one scene, the new baby Dauphin is being paraded through Versailles, and then in literally the next, the Dauphin is a few years older, where we see Marie Antoinette and her two children posing for a picture. However, the painting in question is inaccurate. The real painting is called Marie Antoinette with her two eldest children, Marie-Thérèse Charlotte and the Dauphin Louis Joseph, in the gardens of the Petit Trianon, and it was painted by Swedish painter Adolf Ulrich Wertmüller in 1785. Not by whoever this lady is. And look, it's flipped from the original. In any case, despite producing the new Dauphin of France, the public quickly turn against Marie again. But instead of showing an angry population of commoners, the film decides to just scroll text over a fake portrait of the Queen. Beware the deficit, Queen of Debt, spending France into ruin. This change in public opinion is best demonstrated when she goes to the opera. Earlier in the movie, there's a scene that really happened, when she clapped after a performance. The thing is, clapping was not normally done at the opera, so when this happened, people looked at her strangely. But she was so charming that the audience clapped along. It was one of those early moments that helped Marie Antoinette feel more at home in France. But later in the movie, when she claps after a particularly moving aria, the crowd just stares at her with disdain. And then, it finally clicks in her head. Marie Antoinette now understands that public opinion has changed. Her luxurious lifestyle, her unrestricted spending has made her a scapegoat for all of France's problems, especially that she is, and always will be, the Austrian, a foreign queen. It's a really good scene and historically authentic. Anyway, after that bit in the opera, we see a new portrait put on the walls. Because off-screen, Marie Antoinette has had another child. It's soon replaced by another, and this portrait, like the last one, is slightly off. It's meant to be Marie Antoinette and her children painted by Elizabeth Louis Vigée Lebrun in 1787. But this time I know why the painting is different. In real life, Marie Antoinette had 4 children, whilst in the movie they only show her with 3. The King and Queen's third child was born in March of 1785, another boy named Louis Charles. This third boy was healthy, unlike the Dauphin who was always sickly. They never show any of this in the movie. Because in real life, the little Dauphin's health deteriorated over time, so much so that the family eventually moved him to the Chateau of Meudon, where he was secluded in the hopes of recovering peacefully from his illness, tuberculosis of the spine. So this portrait, the real one anyway, shows the oldest daughter, Marie-Thérèse Charlotte, on the Queen's left, the sickly Dauphin, Louis Joseph, on the right, the third child, Louis Charles, in the Queen's lap, and the Dauphin pointing towards an empty bassinet. it was painted just after their fourth child, Sophie, died, whilst the new portrait in the film copies the real one with only 2 children and the empty bassinet. The next scene in the film is the child's burial. Since time and context of this movie is a problem, we don't know whose funeral this is, the sickly 7.5-year-old Dauphin or the baby Sophie. It's hard to know for certain, but based on what happens next, I'm pretty sure that this burial was meant to be the Dauphin, the sickly Louis Joseph, and the baby Sophie was just completely omitted altogether. The thing is that young Louis Joseph died a month before the storming of the Bastille, and the scene after the funeral sequence is when the king and queen learn about it. Now, what we don't see in the movie, and again, the missing context is really important here, is that for months the king had been attempting to appease the newly formed National Assembly, made up of political leaders from the Third Estate. But due to his indecisiveness and, frankly, having never received a proper education on how to govern, it didn't go well. So when Parisians stormed the Bastille on July 14th, 1789, Louis's advisors recommended that the king and queen, as well as all the other members of the royal family, should flee. Louis's response?
Yes, they must go. I will stay.
Certainly the royal family must find somewhere more secure.
Metz is one of the strongest fortresses in Europe.
You will not be safe here.
I will see to it that my mistresses are off at once. But my place is here with my husband.
In reality, the king was considering going to Metz, but his younger brother, Louis Stanislas, convinced him to stay. In her book, Antonia Fraser notes that the king later told Count von Fersen, yes, the affair partner, von Fersen, that he regretted not leaving at that moment. The king sadly said, and I quote, "I missed my opportunity, and it never came again." In both the movie and in real life, the king and queen stay in Versailles, saying goodbye to their family and friends. And suddenly, in a beautiful parallel to the beginning of the film, Marie Antoinette finds herself alone once again. Things began to go downhill very quickly. The food scarcity problem in Paris only got worse, and the bread riots began. On October the 5th, 1789, Parisian market women marched to Versailles, primarily to demand grain or flour, but secondarily to urge the king to relinquish some of his powers in favour of the new Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, drafted by the National Assembly. Once again, there are talks that the king and queen and their 2 remaining children should flee, but still, they decided to stay.
I will not be a fugitive king.
It is too dangerous here.
At least send the queen and children.
My place is at the king's side.
Just take notice of how the queen looks here, compared to the height of her party years. This film, though not always historically accurate, does a masterful job of visual storytelling. In real life, the market women arrived, and Louis told them where to find 2 granaries to help alleviate the bread crisis. But it was too little, too late. The crowd had changed their purpose. They were no longer satisfied with getting wheat. They wanted Marie Antoinette's head. They also wanted to take the king from Versailles and have him stay in Paris, where the people could keep an eye on him. In the movie, we can hear the mob approach overnight, and this is accurate as the attack came at 4 a.m. We then see the queen flee to her husband's apartment using some of Versailles' famous secret tunnels that connect many of the rooms together. And then later the queen decides to go out on the balcony to face the crowd threatening to kill her. She bows her head down in a display of submission, and it momentarily quietens the mob, but the damage is done, and they are not appeased. The mob resumes chanting and hoisting their weapons in the air, and then we see the king and queen sitting relatively alone at dinner, in a stark contrast to their life in the beginning of the movie. It's a good scene, but that's not exactly how it happened. In real life, the king and queen did go out on the balcony to greet the mob, but it happened after daybreak, and their children also came out to join them, but the outraged crowd shouted for the children to be removed. And eventually, the king, queen, and their children were whisked away to Paris, never to return to Versailles. The final shots of the movie accurately depict the aftermath of the mob's attack. Queen Marie Antoinette's bedroom, the physical representation of her wealth and luxury, was destroyed. The chandelier ripped from the ceiling, the furniture smashed, the doors ripped off their hinges. It was the end of Marie Antoinette. Lady Antonia Fraser gives a really good analysis of this moment, and I quote, The real work of destruction had been done long before by satire, libel, and rumour. Marie Antoinette had become dehumanized, the actual assault by a body of people inspiring each other with their bloodthirsty frenzy was the culmination of the process, not the start of it. And with that, this final scene ends the movie. King Louis XVI was charged with treason and executed by guillotine on January 21st, 1793. Marie Antoinette was charged with depleting the national treasury, conspiracy against the state, and high treason. She was executed by guillotine on October 16th, 1793. Their surviving son, the Dauphin, technically served as King Louis XVII after his father's execution in early 1793, but since France was controlled by the National Assembly and run as a republic, he never actually ruled. He was kept imprisoned and eventually died from illness in June of 1795. The eldest daughter, Marie-Thérèse Charlotte, is the only one who survived the French Revolution. Now Marie Antoinette's story is over, let's finish things off with my impressions of the movie itself. As a period piece, I'm happy to say that the hairstyles and makeup are accurate, as well as the clothes, except for the purposeful inclusion of these Converse All-Stars here. Aside from that, I'd say it deservedly won the Oscar for Best Costume Design in 2007. The general vibe of the Versailles court is also accurate, which obviously shooting on location at the real Versailles will help do that. I mean, it's not always possible to do so, but if you can, this movie is a perfect example why you should. The movie soundtrack is new wave and post-punk, which might throw some history buffs off. For me though, I don't particularly mind, it's all down to personal preference, and it helps Sofia Coppola's work stand out. Her choice to use teenage anthems like Bow Wow's I Want Candy, and moody tracks like The Cure's All Cats Are Grey and Plainsong helped break down this 18th century history and makes it relatable to a modern audience. In a New York Times interview about her film, Sofia Coppola said, and I quote, "I want it to be believable so that it doesn't take you out of the story, but I'm not a fetishist about historical accuracy. I'm just making it my thing." And that is definitely true. Though some lines and quotes are taken directly from their original sources like letters and journal entries, others are changed or completely made up. There are times when we get historically accurate scenes like Marie Antoinette at the opera or the border crossing ceremony, but then there are the wrong portraits and a missing child. We also need to take into account all of the timeline issues with events happening out of order. Though this movie tries to strike a balance, it sacrifices some history for the sake of aesthetics. Some history buffs may not appreciate the changes to Marie Antoinette's story, but what matters to me more is what's missing. In a movie about her life, it's strange that there's very little shown about her relationship with the common people. It's not as if she never spoke to any. In fact, she was considered very accessible to and caring of her French subjects. And to barely mention all of the political intrigue surrounding her life, which ultimately led to her death, feels like a missed opportunity. But as Sofia Coppola told Vogue in an interview, she felt compelled to interpret Marie Antoinette's life in a way that felt girly and youthful, not academic or overly historical. She was, and I quote, "less interested in the political side of history, just like Marie was, so I tried to put in the least amount of politics as possible. It was really fun to take social dynamics from history and interpret them in a way that felt relatable." And there you have it. Although the subject of this film was Marie Antoinette, it wasn't meant to be a historical film about a political figure, it was a film about a teenage girl, but one set in pre-revolutionary Versailles. Well, that about wraps it up. Once again, thanks to today's sponsor, Saley. Don't forget to download the app and use my code HistoryBuffs at checkout for an exclusive 15% discount. My name is Nick Hodges, and thanks for watching History Buffs. And remember, if you like the show, help the channel grow. If you wish to support History Buffs, then you can now do so at Patreon. And as always, let me know in the comments section what you thought about Marie Antoinette. And of course, what historical movie should I review next? In the meantime, check out the History Buffs Twitter and Facebook pages for new updates. Until then, I'll see you next time.